Hi, Mandy. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So I'll introduce you and the topic that we're speaking about. It's dysfunctional workplaces and the cone of silence. And we're speaking to Mandy Grewal. She has enjoyed much success in the tech ecosystem, holding key roles at large Canadian and global organizations. She's the former CEO at PureScale and co-founder and president at former co-founder and president at CloudE. She has a rare blend of expertise in all areas of the business, giving her the capability to build high-performing businesses. So it makes complete sense that Mandy currently works as an advisor to CEOs building high-performing companies with a culture of inclusivity. It's such a pleasure to speak.
Thank you, Manjula. It's always great to talk to you.
We've spoken before. We were in a panel together, and I see that we called each other because we're both wearing lace, which is somewhat nice. So this is gosh, there's so much to be said about this, but because you've had a variety of roles, you've had a variety of roles in leadership at small and really sort of multinational organizations. Talk to me about your experiences with dysfunctional workplaces.
So personally, I think dysfunctional is a personal perspective, right? We all have a different idea of what dysfunctional means to us. And, it's very personal. It's about our own experience. It's about our own background. And so for me, this topic was interesting simply because I've experienced dysfunction from different levels. From an entry-level role to a manager, to an executive, to a CEO, to a board member. And so I've had kind of these different variations in an organization, right? And I think for me, the dysfunction piece is interesting because, when you're talking about unconscious bias, you're talking about ghosting, all that leads to parts of dysfunction. And then sometimes I find that when we're in these kind of types of organizations or roles or working with these people, we can end up taking that on ourselves as a reaction, and we become dysfunctional in those processes, right? And from an experience perspective, it's very subtle things sometimes, and it's actually very interesting on how you react and how you deal with them. And I'll give you an example. There was one time I got asked, I got pulled into a customer meeting for somebody else. It wasn't my customer. It wasn't anything to do with me. They just felt I could handle it really well with the account rep. And so I went to the customer meeting. Everything went well. Everything was great. And we came back and I thought, okay, it's good. Sometimes customers can be difficult. You've got to maneuver that. And we came back and a few days later, I was talking to one of the managers and they were like, oh, I heard you had a really bad meeting. And I was like, no, it was a good meeting, right? Like everything went well. And they're like, no, that's not what we heard. And so I thought, you know what, I don't like gossiping because that adds to the dysfunction. And so, I went to the rep and I went into an office and I said, hey, let's chat about this. I think we have different perspectives on how this meeting went. I thought the meeting went well. And, you seem to have a different perception. Maybe we should figure out like what that is and how can I help? And it was really interesting because I learned through the process that he was very uncomfortable with assertive females. And the whole time I was sitting talking to him, he spent the entire time with his hands on his eyes, rubbing his eyes. He couldn't make eye contact. And I found it really interesting. And it was more just like me asking him, like, how do we work together on this? And I wasn't being bullish or anything else. And anyway, after that, I realized, it was much better for me to go to him directly and figure that out. It becomes far more dysfunctional if we have these conversations behind people's backs, or they become these kind of cones of silence where we start having, these conversations with other people. And so it's much better to kind of deal with it directly sometimes, right? But I just think dysfunction, I don't know, sometimes maybe it can be good because it causes disruption, right? Like we're at Disrupt HR right now, right? There's many different perspectives to it.
It's interesting because in a way, what we've talked about before are almost symptoms. You could say they're symptoms. Ghosting,
yes.
The fact that there are unconscious biases being lived and played upon in the workplace are symptoms. But so when you see those signs, you almost have to look around and say, is this the right workplace? So, having said that, what are some of the factors that you think contribute to dysfunctional workplaces?
So one of the things is this culture of yes. So I'm quite outspoken, not in a bad way. I just think I have a viewpoint. I'm going to say it nicely. I want you to hear me, and I want you to influence me if you want me to think differently. But I think a lot of these organizations have a culture of yes, especially when it comes to executives. We find that when someone's in a CEO role or someone's in a, above you as you see it, that there's a power there and that you must say yes and you must go along with it. And if you look at, if you look at racism right now, it's built on a systemic culture of yes. It's built on this culture of where people may not agree with it, but people go along with it, right? And it also kind of ties to that culture of silence where, we think we need to be quiet. We think we need to not disrupt it, and I've noticed this not even in the corporate world, but with friends too. You'll have that one dysfunctional friend who's really disruptive or just, being a bad person, and everybody else will condone it or not say anything and allow it to fester, right? Rather than deal with it, talk to that person and say, look, your behavior is like this. People don't deal with it. And so, that silence becomes really interesting. So just like half an hour before I jumped on this call, this quote popped up for me and it's so interesting. So I'm just going to read it out. And it says, when we avoid difficult conversations, we trade short-term discomfort for long-term dysfunction. And that's how this festers in organizations, right? With silence. And then the third thing for me that I've experienced is nepotism. I think nepotism can be extremely dangerous, especially at the top, because what happens is it forms this wall, and it forms this wall where you feel like if you were to say something, you've got all these other people that are going to stick together against you, right? And so it's very hard to speak up, and you think everybody's together, right? And I think it's really bad when part of that nepotism includes the HR leader as well. I think as a HR leader, you have to be independent. And I think, regardless of what role you're in within HR, for me, even when I was in roles of management, even as a CEO, I relied very heavily on HR to tell me what to do, and I would always listen. Because to me, I always felt like they were the people experts. I think I'm doing the right thing and I want to do the right thing, but I've got my biases, right? Or I'm emotionally involved in an interaction. And so I want that independent view. So what I would say from a HR perspective is don't be afraid to speak up, right? It's okay for you to tell me or whoever else and say, no, that's not right, or that's not how you do it, right? Speak up.
That's you're right to sort of pierce through that cone of silence. And I saw this comment that came up that I really loved. It's by Haley Peak, someone from the audience, and she says, I think it's important to remember that if you're in a leadership role, it is critical that you remember that you work for your employees; they do not work for you. This ensures safer workplaces, connecting human to human, and learning about your individual team members. And she says that in this way you go on to support conversations within the workplace and create psychologically safer work environments. Which brings me to this next question. What are some of the things we can do if we find ourselves in a dysfunctional workplace?
So for me, a lot of it comes down to is your foundation has to be yourself. Because you have to navigate through this, and the only way you can do that is by being yourself. And when I took one of my roles, there was a book that I read, and it was called The Soul of Leadership by Deepak Chopra. And he talks about in there that in moments of chaos, and when everything around you may be falling apart, you have to find that core within yourself that is your silence, that is your intuition, right? And I think that's that piece in here where you have to lead as yourself, and you, like I said before, you can't be afraid to speak up, but not speak up in a way where it's adding to the dysfunction and it's argumentative or to fight or anything like that, right? It's more to do with the fact that you have to be able to speak up even if the CEO is the problem, right? And then you have choices to make. You stay or you go, right? I mean, I've been in situations with people where it's been extremely uncomfortable, right? And you internalize that and you try and figure it out. And in the end, it's like, do I stay or do I go? Am I going to lose myself by being part of this? And am I going to be mentored into being somebody I don't want to be, right? And I think that's the other key to this is your mentors. I had somebody once ask me if they could mentor me. I would say we were in conflict. I didn't like something that had happened, and it was like, hey, let me mentor you. And the problem I had was, let me mentor you on how to behave in a man's world. And my response was, no, you cannot mentor me, right? And she was several levels above me at the time. I was more junior. And I said, no, you can't mentor me. And she said, oh, you don't like me. And I said, no, it's got nothing to do with liking you. I don't know you enough to know if I like or dislike you, but you don't know me, right? So how can you can't mentor me right now because we don't agree on things, right? And I need to be mentored by somebody who aligns with my values and aligns with who I am, and that's going to take me into more of being myself as opposed to being away from myself, right? And so I think in these situations that we have to be very clear on who we are, on what we think, and it's not about being right; it's about doing the right thing, right? And I think in HR roles, that's where a lot of it comes down to, is when you're dealing with people, right? Nobody's perfect at it. We're all trying to figure this out. And so that self-aware piece for me is key.
I love that. I like that idea of being self-aware. So talk to me about what ability we have to drive change.
So, you know what? I always think it's a numbers game. It's always about stats. We are all a stat in everything we do. We're on one side or the other. And within organizations that have dysfunction, or you find that things aren't working, find creative ways to drive programs or to do things that kind of sway that mindset, right? Sometimes you may have somebody from an executive perspective who doesn't agree with you. And like Christine said, they all have to be at the table with you. You have to find these allies that are willing to work with you at the executive level. Win them over, find ways to kind of implement programs. One of the things I absolutely hate are performance reviews. Like I hate performance reviews. I was one of the people, like, when I've sat in management or even executive meetings and, they talk about performance reviews, I was the one, like, throw them out. They're so judgmental. I find it's about us sitting here as managers, executives, or whoever, judging people, right? And telling them what we think they're good at and what they're not good at. It shouldn't be like that. It should be the other way around. Same with hiring. So Adam hired Hippo. I love his thinking, right? Like he talks about how get rid of the resume, right? It's just, if we figured out what these right fits were and how to hire people that fit our culture. Now, like, how many people look at a job description, take the job description, and then change their resume to meet that job description, right? I've done it.
Yeah.
I mean, many of us do it, right? So those are the things for me that are like slightly dysfunctional in organizations, right? I don't know, we get caught up in these things, but we don't necessarily look at the people and what they would be a good fit for. And I personally think, and this is probably why, for me advising CEOs, it's more like we need to flip that a little bit, where here's a job description. I'm going to go find somebody that meets this, right? And you should, but people should be allowed to show up as they are. And then you kind of figure out this good fit, right? As opposed to, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I think you've got. And this is what I can teach you, right? I think it should be a two-way street. I've always approached every conversation as a two-way street where it's a win-win. I mean, I remember having an interview with a CEO, and at the end of it, I said, you know what, I like you, so I'm going to work for you. And he was like, what? I said, well, if I didn't like you, I would not work for you. Right? I think it's okay to be you, and it's okay to be different, and it's okay to disrupt. And I think what we can do differently too is not just go along with things, but again, think them through and understand how we can drive change, right? Like, how can we have impact regardless of what your title is? I mean, I think I was in an entry-level role. I had just started. I was doing data entry, and I started creating macros to automate data entry, and I would take on these vendors that were on credit hold and say, let me see what I can do with them, and start turning them around. I never associated my ability to get something done with my title. I just always went into an organization and thought, oh, like let me suggest this, or let me suggest this, and started driving change that way. But what I did was I led with curiosity. I was always curious, not about my role, but what everybody did around me. You know, I had one company where early on again, they were going through rounds of layoffs, and I started to ask my boss, like, what's going on? How did you keep me and you let all these other people go? And she explained, she's like, I think you have a great amount of potential. I think this is what you do well. I think this is, something that you can develop on. And so it kind of gave me the ability to understand how I could impact change within that organization. But it also gave me the ability to understand the executive team, how decisions were made, how to influence them, how to drive change, right? And so I think curiosity is a big key in how we drive change, to understand what's going on around us and to be aware of it. Sorry, a bit long-winded.
I love that you. I love that you've actually. We're coming to the end of the session, and I love that you've redefined the HR leader as not just being someone who's focused on just people, but actually impact of the organization, which is what interested me in all of these talks too, because I think that that's the role that we can play. So we are running a little bit late, so I will pop in one question before we end the session. And then of course, Mandy's going to be around for everyone who wants to stick around, and you're getting a lot of kind comments. You're the best, Mandy is one. Loving your energy and wisdom. I do think there's a lot of wisdom in this. So Haley Peak's question, because I do find this very interesting. I do think those in HR roles often get stuck between trying to relate human to human, but also following protocols. Do you think this is starting to shift, and HR folks are investing in self-awareness training and how to have supportive conversations with employees? Are you seeing that shift?
Yes, and I think it's because of social media. And I think it's because of this human-to-human connection on social media and having access to people we would never have access to normally. So the people we surround ourselves is who we become. And I find with HR leaders, it can become very isolated within an organization. Shit happens, it gets given to HR. Hey, I've messed up with this, now can you go fix it? Because they're gonna sue me or whatever. And I find that's how it's done. And now I find that's where it's shifting, right? Because we've got social media. And so lately on LinkedIn, I've been sharing these stories about, my encounters with different people, and they're very uncomfortable to share. I'm just going to put that out there, right? It makes me very uncomfortable. However, I get so much great feedback from people saying, oh my God, I didn't realize, and don't feel alone, and can we chat about this? And I think that's where that connection is changing. And I think the one thing I would tell everybody is develop allies outside of your organization, because you need lifelines outside of your company. One of the biggest mistakes I made was that in a number of roles, I was very heads down in my company, and I was very much about that culture and about them and being part of that sometimes you need that lifeline outside. Because I think, especially as HR, life is about humans, right? There is no more role that's any more important than HR, I think. And so you're the aorta of the organization. You're the one that pumps the oxygenated blood from the heart to the organization, right? And you need to build those allies outside of your organization, so that when you need help, or when you need your head kind of taken out of things, or you need a different perspective and you need to know, what is dysfunctional, you've got independent advice.
Mandy, thank you. I adore you, and I'm also a little scared of you, but thank you. I love the words I sue to you.
I love you.
That was lovely, and such wisdom. And I just want to tell people that there is a networking session after this, which is a great way to actually have a deeper conversations with the people here and each other. And there's also an expo. So I'm going to stop this broadcast, but that does not mean you can leave. You have to still stick around, so that we get a chance to meet. Thank you, Mandy. I am going to be handing it back to Giorgio. It's been such a pleasure, and I've learned a lot from these 3 sessions. So stick around, and we're going to all meet back at the main stage.
Bye.
Bye, Mandy.
Bye.